Greetings, technology enthusiasts. I am Chandrahas and I am delighted to be here with you representing CyberBrainer. Do you not believe that the technology sector is advancing at an unprecedented rate, making this an opportune moment to acquire the skills that will facilitate your progress? With CyberBrainer, we are empowering you to take control of your own future. At CyberBrainer, we do not merely impart your interests. We assert that information is power, yet it is the application of knowledge that distinguishes you. Our courses are meant to equip you with essential skills, whether you are pursuing data science, understanding artificial intelligence, or delving into cybersecurity. Let us commence the session and seize the future today. Thank you.
Now, when you come to related objects, you'll see two types of relationships. One on the left hand side, it says links to related business objects, and then this another section on the right hand side which says link from related business objects. Anyone know what is the difference between these two? For example, let's go back to that requirement I mentioned yesterday. My first requirement was I had given you two requirements, but in a different layout. The first one was get all workers or employees, whatever, and their land details and the plans that are assigned to them. The second was get all plans and their associated workers. In the first case, the requirement is I get an employee, the details of the employee and the plans assigned to the employee salary plan, car allowance, mobile allowance, and on and forth. In this case, as we already discussed yesterday, the requirement would be to build my report using a PBO of worker, and then I want to get the details of the plans. The RBO that I would be using to get the details of the plan would be compensation plan or any related. At this point in time, we're not looking at technicals. Let's say it is the compensation plan. I'll get all the related details of the plan. For example, the plan amount, the plan basis, and all the other details, plan package. I'll get that from the compensation plan. The reason I'm able to get these details because there exists a relationship. If I go to PBO business object worker, there exists a relationship between a worker and a compensation plan. Similar to how there can be a relationship between a worker and a position. Let's say CEO. In this case, this worker occupies this position. But then there's also that inverse relationship. This position is occupied by this worker. There can exist one-way relationship between objects, or they can exist two-way relationship between objects. Now, this is what this table represents, that relationship. When you come to related business object, currently I'm looking at the plan. Now the left hand side, if you see, it shows those business objects that are related to the compensation plan. On the left hand side, you see there are 16 business objects that are related to the compensation plan. For example, in this case it would be, if I'm building a report on the compensation plan, let's say salary, how many other business objects data can I bring onto this report? It basically says if my primary business object on a report is compensation plan, How many other business objects data can I get? The answer would be 60. If I click on any one of this, let's say frequency, if you see it says if you want to get data from frequency onto compensation plan, then you use frequency as the field. There exists a link between compensation plan and frequency. And this allows me to get data from this related business object onto compensation plan. But then if you look on the right hand side, it shows the inverse relationship. It basically shows how many business objects compensation plan in turn is related to. Compensation plans are of different types. We have bonus plans and stock plans and on and forth. Now if you see the difference, you can get data from frequency business object, which is the related business object, onto compensation plan business object. And then this is the reverse. You can get data from compensation plans and its sub-business objects, which is bonus and stock, onto compensation review. On the left-hand side, it basically shows those business objects that compensation plans links to. On the right-hand side, it lists the business objects that in turn have links to compensation plan. This represents a two-way relationship. For example, a worker links to a position and a position links to a worker. Once again, if you go to a worker business object and come here and search for compensation plan, it says if I'm building a report on the worker business object, then I can get data from compensation plan because compensation plan is a related business object. But is the reverse true? If I'm building a work report on compensation plan, can I get data from worker? I can as well. If you see, this is a two-way relationship. If I am building a report on the worker business object, I can get data from the compensation plan. Similarly, if I'm building a report using compensation plan, in turn I can get data from worker. Either I can see here or I can see here as well. It's the same thing. When I search here as well, you'll see that compensation plan exists here as well. And it shows me the same relationship because from compensation plan, you only have one link to worker. Similarly, from compensation plan, you only have one link to worker. From worker, you have 17 links. These are the fields that you can use to get that data. We'll have a look at that in a bit. Makes sense. This denotes the relationships between the primary business object and the business objects that it relates to. Not all relationships are two-way. If you see here, compensation plan only links to 16 other business objects, but in turn 43 other business objects links to compensation plan. Understanding this framework in turn. In fact, Workday reporting is very simple. But understanding these nuances and bringing them into your reporting, that takes a bit of time and that takes a lot of practice. Once you start working through your reports, you'll start getting a grasp of this. But the concept itself is not very hard. It's simple, just a bit confusing. This is what these two sections show us. Now we were talking about the fields and we saw single instance and multi-instance. In addition to single instance and multi-instance, there are other field types as well, right? As we saw yesterday. In terms of field types, we have seen single instance, multi-instance. Now there are other field types as well. Let me go back, and I think the report that we had created was, what is the search prefix for a report? RD's report definition. This was our report that we were building yesterday. Let's go ahead and edit this report. Alright, I'm adding a field called worker. Now, in addition to single instance, multi-instance, there is another instance field and it is called self-referencing instance. Now it is identified by this icon here. When I click here, if you see, this is called a self-referencing field. Now the reason is this field is called self-referencing. This field, if you see, is a worker. It links worker with the worker, business object, right? Worker is a business object, but within that business object, there is a field called worker, right? Which gives me the worker name and worker details. If you see, it says identifies the worker and enables you to view and access related details and actions of the worker. Similarly, on position business object, there would be a field called position right. That is a self-referencing field. There's no difference in terms of how you use it. It's just a distinction. Any other field when you search it. If I search for position, right. And go here. This field. It is position field which links worker with position right. And that's why it's known as an instance. The other field, because it's available on the same business object as it represents, it's known as a self-referencing. Else there's no difference, right? Can you please repeat that once again? All I'm saying is, let's say I have worker business object. The name of this business object is worker right. Or let's take a simple example. The name of this business object called position. Now this position has many fields, right? For example, the position title, the effective date of the position, the status of that position, and on and forth. The employee who occupies that position. But in addition to all of this, there would also be an instance field which is also known as position right. When you use this field on a report, this is a business object. This business object would have a field called position right. When you use this field, it will show you the position details, the position name, and position description. Now this field, if you see, it's called position. It's an instance field which identifies a single position. But then this field is available on the position business object itself. It doesn't link to any other business object. On the other hand, on worker business object, here there would be a field called position. These two are different. Different in the sense this field, it links worker business object with position business object. This position field, it links to itself, or I can put it the other way, it identifies itself. That's why this is known as a self-referencing field, because it doesn't link position business object to any other business object. Whereas this it is known as a single instance field, because in this case it is linking worker to position. Similarly, this, because it doesn't link to any other business object, it is known as a self-referencing field because this field it identifies a single worker. Let me show this on report and then it will make sense. Here I am taking worker. Let me also add full name. and then I'm adding position. And then I'm adding position. This position is on the worker business object. I'm on the left hand side, I'm taking worker. On the worker business object, I have this position field which links to worker. I'm taking this. Now let me add position. This very the same field that I referenced here. And within that, let me search for position. Right now, if you see, the icon changes because this position field is available on its own business object. Here it's called a self-referencing field. There's no difference. That's how Workday uses the naming convention. Within position, there are hundreds and thousands of positions available. Each position is an instance, as we discussed yesterday. We have a position called CEO, you have a position called VP Sales, VP this, you have a position called Consultant. This field identifies each of these instances, but then it doesn't link to any other business object. That's why this is known as a self-referencing field. Here this position is also same, but Workday has put it technically or in terms of its architecture. These are two different fields that Workday has created. This field links worker to this position, but in terms of how we use them, it doesn't make any difference. Here this employee, can you like, how will the report output differ? That's what I'm saying. I'm going to show you now. There's no difference. Maybe the layout and how it looks may be a bit different in terms of how Workday shows their output, but as such there wouldn't be any difference. That's why I've added both those fields. If you see here, the only difference is because this field, if you see, both have exactly the same data. It's just that the layout is different. Now, why is the layout different? Let me start with here. As I mentioned, this is that self-referencing worker field that I had picked on the report, which is based on the worker business object. I took the worker field, and this was that self-referencing field. And as the description said, this identifies a single worker in my system. It gives me exact same data as this field, which is again a text field. As I mentioned on the worker field, there's a field called worker name. This gives me the worker name as well as this gives me the worker name. The difference is this is a text field, a plain text, which means I cannot do any additional actions on this field. Whereas on this field it is an instance field, which means I can open it and perform any other actions. It identifies a worker itself. That's the only difference. Now here, this is the position field which is on the worker business object. Because this position field is on worker business object, Workday doesn't show the name of the worker because this field is already available on the worker business object. This, any which way, shows me that this position is linked to this worker. But then, because this is a self-referencing field, just the way this field shows data is a bit different. It shows me the field, the name of the position, which is exactly the same, but it also shows which worker is linked to it. That's it. That's the only difference. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter in terms of how you use them on a report. It doesn't make any difference. It's just that this is a separate distinction in terms of the field type. There's something called self-referencing field. This field will be available on the same business object as the name of the field. This is a self-referencing field for position. This is a self-referencing field for worker, whereas this is a single instance which links worker with a specific position. That's the only difference. Apart from that, there's nothing else that we need to know. Right? We have self-referencing fields. As I mentioned, they link a business object to itself, or the other way to identify them is that they are available on the same business object as the name of that field itself. That's the only difference. The next field type is a text field. Now, as the name suggests, this is plain text. For example, your age. Your age is plain text or number, right? 23, that's it, or 35, whatever. I cannot do any action on it, right? From here at least I cannot change it. It's plain text. It gives me the same information, but then because this is a plain text field, I cannot do any action on it, right? Plain text field is identified by a T icon, which is basically text. I open the report side by side. If you see, a plain text field is identified by a T icon. T is text field. This is also Workday delivered field, and it's a text field which is available on the worker business object. Now text field do not have any relationships, right? Because they are not instances. They do not link to other two different objects. They are simply some piece of data to represent up the object on which they are right. This is an attribute of the object itself, right? It doesn't link any other business object. We have field of type text. Now it depends on how your client wants to see the output. They may say we don't want anyone to take any actions from this report. And in that case, you will simply have a text field. This is another field type, for example, age. Now age is a numeric field. If you see here, this is again a Workday delivered field and it's pure number, right? Let's see, this should be some calculated field. Someone has created a custom field. Don't worry about it. This is the numeric field and it's the worker's age, right? And it will give you plain number. Then the next field type is of type date. For example, your date of birth, right? Now date of birth is a field of type date. If I go here and it is identified by this icon, numeric field is identified by a hash. Date of birth, it's a field of type date. Your hire date, again a field of type date, right? The payroll run date, a field of type date. This is once again a Workday delivered field which identifies the birth date of the worker. Let's quickly run this report and then we'll have a look at other field types. This user doesn't have access to see this information, or if it's 0, probably. This is strange. It would have shown plain number. I'm not sure why it shows this way. It will show plain number 23 or 45 or 36 or whatever. And this is the date of birth of the employee. Now, in addition to numeric field, there's another field which is of type currency. The difference between numeric and a currency field, even currency is a number. For example, if I may add, let's say, if you see, this is a field of type currency. A currency is also an amount, right? It will show you your total base pay amount. But the difference between a currency field and a numeric field is that a currency field would also have the associated currency symbol or currency code. When I say your total base pay is 100, I would also have to specify 100 what. Is it $1 or 100 pounds or 100 rupees, right? The difference between a numeric and a currency field is that it is also associated with the currency code, which means whenever you use a field of type currency, if you go to the options here and if you search for currency, you can show the currency either symbol or code. Let me add both of them. Symbol, it will simply show a symbol. For example, a dollar symbol. But then if I select this option, show currency code column, it will show a separate column with currency code. For example, USD or GBP, right? The difference between a numeric field or a currency field is that currency field also comes with the associated code. Let me see if I can search on a numeric field. I don't have the option, right? Because a numeric field doesn't have the associated currency value. I'm quickly running this. This is that show currency symbol. The reason this shows is because I selected that option, show currency symbol. And then I also selected that option, which was show currency code column. Because I selected that there's a separate column which gets added, which shows me the currency code. Right? We have fields of type numeric. We have fields of type currency, which is now. There are some interesting calculations we can do with respect to currency, and we'll have a look at that later. Which is number plus the currency code. And then we have a field of type. Text as well, right? We have a field of type. Now, when I run any report, there are two ways I can run, right? Either I can run it in test mode or I can run it in the run mode. When I run it in test mode, it will show me the first 10 values. Even if there are thousands of records you want to quickly test something, you don't. Let's say there are 10,000 records. Now, every time you make a small change and you want to test it, you wouldn't want the report to run for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? Instead of running the whole load every time you want to quickly test something, right? Then you can run it in test mode. It will give you the first 10 records no matter how many rows of data are there. You can quickly check some information that you want to. That is a test mode. When you run it in run mode, then it will give you full output based on the filter and the data source that you have selected. Let's see what data source I have selected right now. I've selected workers for HCMM reporting, right? And I'm basically taking all active workers. If I will not talk about this for now, let me take all retirees. This is what I was showing, right? When I select this data source now, it says it allows you to get the details of the retirees. I'm not making any other changes to this report. Let me now run it. If you see, it doesn't give me any information. That's because in my system there are no retirees, right? The business object that we selected, it allowed us to identify the fields or the columns available on this report. And the data source that we select, it identifies the instances that this report will return or the rows that this report will return. If I change this report data source, it will then give me data based on the data source value. Similarly, now if I select my reports or my direct reports and run it, I'm running it in run mode, not the test mode. Let's see how many rows of data it returns. It is returning me 3 to 6 items because if you see, these are those 3 to 6 workers who are managed by Lubin mechanism, right? If I run it to the access of some other worker, let me proxy as this worker. I don't know who he is. He shows us executive assistant. No, that's fine. Let me take someone who is a manager. Let's take this person. He shows manager information analysis. This report is not shared with him, right? Where is security profile? She doesn't even have access to proxy. That's fine. That's fine. If I run this report as this worker, then it will show me only those employees who are managed by Megan Morgan and on and forth. Alright, that's what data source does. It identifies the rows of data that your report returns. Now, having looked at this, let's add some simple calculated fields. I'm not sure why age is not. The options field is only for currency, it's not for any other. Others as well, they are available, but then it doesn't show. It will only show based on the relevant value. For example, age. If you see, because it is numeric, I can use sum or average and on and forth minimum, maximum. It only shows relevant options based on the field type you select. If I select age and then sum, then what would it sum? Before that you have to. If you're doing grouping, then it will allow you to sum. That's a different concept. We'll have a look at that. When we come to sort, that's when we'll have a look at sum and other options. And in this report, if I take out all the fields and the business objects except the first one, how would the report output look like? It will give me just the first option. It doesn't matter. But how would it look like? All the employee, only the employee name, or just the employee? Report will also always gives you the output based on the fields that you have selected. If this is the only field I have selected, it will just give me the worker name. Each field acts independently. It doesn't matter if there is no other field on this report and just this field. It will give me just the worker name. Alright, let me add up some simple calculations on this report. The first thing that I'm adding is age. I'm adding date of birth. I'm also adding the worker's hire date. Now, what I want is I only want those workers whose age is available, right? When you hire some person, you may not enter his date of birth, right? It's optional. You may even not even launch that edit personal information process. Now, when I run this report based on the data source that I have selected, it will give me all workers in based on that data source. What is? I want to put an additional filter that I only get, and the reason I'm putting it now is because I see those blank ages, right? I only want those workers whose have a date of birth value, right? I can go to the filter tab and put any additional filter. As I mentioned yesterday, the data source acts as my primary filter. And then on top of that, I can put any additional filters based on my requirement. My requirement is only get me those workers whose date of birth is not missing, right? Or whose date of birth is available. I can go to filter tab and I can add a filter. If you see, this is very similar to how if you've worked on business processes, the business process calculated fields look. Or if you've worked on compensation plans, your compensation eligibility rules look. This is the field based on which I want to design my filter. What is my requirement? Only get me those employees if their date of birth is not empty. I can search for date of birth. This is my date of birth. And I'm selecting the operator. I'm saying date of birth is not blank, right? We'll talk about this in a bit more detail later. I basically want out of all active and terminated workers. That is the data source I have selected. I only want those workers whose date of birth is not blank. Let's once run this report and then we'll add our calculations. Fingers crossed. I'm not sure why age doesn't show up. Report has been filtered using masked field. Data oh. What is masked fields? Is that hidden? That's why I think this is a new feature. We were discussing it. This is a new feature that has come in some of the latest releases. Let's see. That's why I cannot see that age, because if you want certain sensitive data to be not visible, we can mask it. Mask recruiting on. Maintain. Let's see if I can disable masking for now. Disable data mask. Have a look at this task. They have masked persons. Date of birth person's birthplace. Usually what Workday does is, and I'm sure since you are already in Workday ecosystem, you're already aware when a new feature is released, it will come with limited functionality. Because this is a first iteration, I believe. There are only few fields that can be masked. But then, over a period of time, Workday will keep adding to this, right? And then it will give you additional functionality. Alright, let's see if my report gives data error now. Now there's no error. And that's why now I know it was giving me those starts. Alright, now if you see, it's only giving me 91 workers. And that's because there are only 91 workers whose date of birth is not blank, right? And this is the numeric field. It gives me the numeric field value. This person's age is 55. Now I have a very simple requirement. This is the age of the person, right? Which is basically today's date minus his date of birth, which is 45 years. Now what I want is now. This may not be, this is just a hypothetical requirement, right? Let's say I tell you, can you please get me the age of the worker as of their hire date? What I want is, this is my worker population and their age. What I want to understand is, what is the age at which I am hiring my employees, right? I want to do some analysis on that data. Can you get me the age of the worker as of their hire date? Or how do you think you can get me this information? Obviously, there's no Workday delivered field, right? Which to get this requirement. Now, how do you think I can get this information? I need once again the age of the employee as of the date of their hire. If you see the calculated field, right? Yes, we'll create the calculated minus hire date. What we'll do is not system date minus as of hire date. What we need is the age of the worker as of their hire date, as of the date they were hired, which means we need to find the difference between their date of birth and their hire date, right? That's what will give me the age as of the date they were hired. Now here we have our answer, right? When we create calculated fields, we create them using different functions. Now there are two ways I can create calculated fields. One is global calculated fields. The second one is report specific calculated fields. Let me add. I can directly create a calculated field from the report itself, or I can create a calculated field using the task. Create calculated field. This is the task for creating a calculated field. And when I go in here, I'll select the function. This is what determines what that calculated field would do. Or the other option, as I mentioned. Now this calculated field that I create, it can then be used throughout this tenant by other reports as well, right? This acts kind of my global calculated field, which can be used in any relevant report, right? Or what I can also do is I can create a report specific calculated field, and that calculated field will not be visible, will not be or cannot be used in any other report. I can go in here and create calculation field for report. That is the only difference. Everything else is exactly the same. Now, as I mentioned, a field identifies the attribute of a business object. We have Workday delivered attributes. Name age in this case is a Workday delivered attribute. Now we are creating a custom attribute. This is once again an attribute of the business object. Whenever I create a calculated field, I'll have to specify the business object for which I'm creating this calculated field. Business object is a required field. Now this does two things. The first thing, it determines on which report my calculated field will be available. Because this calculated field I'm creating on worker business object, which means this is an attribute of worker business object. That means any relevant reports which have worker as the primary business object or the related business object can use my calculated field. But at the same time, it also determines which all fields can be used on this calculated field. Let me show that. Here, what we basically want is we want to find the difference between hire and date of birth. For that, I can simply search for date. And as I mentioned, the function identifies the type of calculation that your field does. There are quite a few date related fields. What I want is to find the difference between two dates. I'll select date difference. Alright, I want to find the difference between two dates. That's why I'll select a date difference and I'll give a name. Different companies have different naming convention, but this is a generic naming convention which I've seen being used in most of the projects. Usually we go by CF, which stands for calculated field, the name of the business object or the name of the function. Here I'm using a function D, which is date difference or LRV, look up related value EMI, ESI and on and forth. A function to identify what that calculation does. Here I'm saying date difference, or I could have said date difference, right? The business object on which this calculation is being used, that is worker, and then a short description, right? I'm saying age on hire. Now the advantage is when someone searches, they look at this description, it will give them a fair bit of idea of what this calculated field does, right? When they search, probably I'm searching for a field called age and this field comes up. Now looking at this, I know this is a date difference on the worker business object which finds the age on the hire. I need not go inside and look at the calculation. It gives me some bit of idea as to what that field does. Always sensible to give meaningful names to your calculated fields. And this is the naming convention I have always used for all my reporting, right? You'll find some variations of this naming convention. CF date difference, worker age on hire. Now here, I need to find the difference between two dates. End date is the higher date, start date is the lower date. Now obviously the higher date is the bigger date, right? End date is the bigger date, start date is the smaller date, right? I want to find the difference between higher date and from it I want to subtract the date of birth. Alright, as I mentioned, the business object that you select, it serves two purposes. The first is that now I can use this calculated field on any report which is based on worker as a primary or related business object. And it also identifies what fields can be referenced within this calculated field. For example, let me create another calculated field of the same type. Right, I'm again creating calculated field of type date difference. Right, but this time let's say I'm creating it on a job profile just as an example. Right, I'm giving it a name test. Right now, let me search for hire date. If I see that field is not available, right? The reason I'm able to reference hire date within this calculated field is because this field, in turn, is based on either worker or one of its related business objects. The field business object that you select here serves two purposes. First, that identifies on which report or reports this calculated field can be used. But then it also identifies what fields in turn can be referenced within that calculated. Right? I cannot find hire date here because hire date is not available on job profile. It's not related to job profile at all. Right now, the next part. I can find the difference in terms of months, right? I was 10 years at the time of my hire, or I was 120 months at the time of my hire, right? The difference can be found in terms of years, months, days, hours, and on and forth. Now, wherever you have these numeric calculations, you'll always find return 0 on error. What it does is, if there is some error, let's say for a given worker hire date is not available, just hypothetical example, right? Now, in that case, your report will error out, right? Instead of your report, because that data you cannot subtract some value from no value, right? In that case, your report itself will not error out. That particular column will give you 0 value, right? For example, if I'm running this report for the full population and a given worker doesn't have a date of birth, then it will not error out, right? And this especially happens during your currency calculations and other fields, and we'll have a look at that later. It will simply give you a 0 value instead of your reporting giving an error. Always advisable. Wherever this function is available, select that unless you have very specific reasons not to select that. Now my calculated field is ready, which means I can copy my calculated field. Go in here and I can add my calculated field. This is a new attribute that I have created for the worker. That means it can be referenced in any report which has the worker business object. And now when I click on Alright, I'll have to check. This is a new functionality. I'm not sure why it behaves this way, but any which ways. Now it will give me the difference between the date of birth of the employee and their hired date. Now, if you see, this is the name or the technical name of the calculated field. That is not what you want your users to see. Instead of that, what you can actually do is you can change the field label. I edit this report. Or not just calculated fields. You can change the field label of any of the other fields. Here, you can go in here and override the label. I want to override the label as age or higher. If it is a numeric value, then you can also select the format. For example, you want to show 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places, or anything else that can be done. You can go in here and select the format. You want 1 decimal places, 2 decimal places. You can show percentages. You can also select the format. The reason this format option opens up is because these two are numeric fields. Right. Any questions till now? Alright, now what I have one question. For this age dependent on the hire date, can we use lookup related value or just this calculated? No, we have not used lookup related value, right? No, I'm asking, can we fetch the same data with a different calculator field, or this is the only solution? If you want to find the difference between two dates, then the only solution is date difference. Lookup related values or any other field, those are used for a different purpose. if you want to find the difference between two dates, then this is the only calculated field that you need. But I can use like lookup related value and then age and then as of hire date, right? No lookup related value is a completely different concept that comes up. You remember we spoke about that you can only get data from one level, right? Now, if you want to get, let's say, data which is 2 level deep, then you use something called LRV. The concept of LRV is you want to look up, as the name itself suggests, you want to look up value of some field. That's when you use LRV. We use, for example, I want to create, now we wanted to create that data on job profile, right? The same calculation. Create calculated field, right? When I went in there and selected job profile, I couldn't. Now, when I go to date difference, when I search for date of birth or when I search for hire date here, I'm not able to get those fields. That's because those two fields are not available on job profile itself. I want to get those fields onto job profile. That's when I'll do an LRV, get data, birth and hire date onto job profile, and then I can do the difference. Lookup related value is only used, or the purpose of an LRV is when certain field is not available and you want to get that field, then you do an LRV. We will talk about that. For what scenario have you used LRV? Like lot of stuff where you need to create like a job site. Like you need to fetch a job title of a worker as of hire date or as of termination date. Any which is since you have asked. Let's talk about LRV first. For example, let I want to build a simple calculation. Now what I want is I want to put, let's say, one more filter. I only want to pull those employees whose company subtype is, let's say, every employee belongs to a company. Let me add a filter here or a field here and I'm saying company. Right? Now in turn I go in here. Let's assume now again, this is you can deliver Workday reporting using multiple ways. Let me run this. I should have a filter as well, but that's fine. Now what I'm doing is I'm getting, this is how we need to understand this. For each worker, this is the company that worker belongs to. These are all of type company. That's fine. For each worker, this is the company that they belong to. And then I'm going into the details of company itself and looking at the subtype of that company. I could not have pulled this information directly on worker. That's why I used that company as the link. Some new opening. Be a worker once again. This is what I've done, right? This is a field that I'm going to use to look at the subtype of that company. Company which is directly available on the worker business object, or I can put it this way. This field, it links worker business object with the company business object. Now this field, if you see when I go to subtype, it is available on the company which is a subtype of organization. It is available on the organization business object. This has no relation to worker at all. I'm getting the details of the company right. But how am I able to get it? I'm going to that one level down, which is what we discussed other day. Now I'm going to the company level, and from company, I'm getting the details of that company. I'm going one level down and getting the details of that level. Now what I want is I want to put a filter and say I only want to get those workers whose company is, let's assume A, B, C. Let me go to this company and just for the sake of it, let me change this. Just for the sake of it, I'm changing the subtype. Let's say I want to select that company whose subtype is talent pool. Just as an example, my requirement is, can you get me all those workers who belong to a company with a subtype of talent pooling? Now, how do you get this requirement? You want to get the details of this particular field which is available on the company business object onto your worker. Now what I can do is I can create a lookup related value. Now this is what I'll do. Before I go there, if I go to related business, object search for company, and I'll select this link. This link that you see here, right? This link identifies that I can get data onto worker of company using any one of these options. The reason I built this report, I selected company here is because using this field or using any of these other fields, I can get data from company onto worker. And that's why if I have to get the details of the company, I use those fields. That is what this link identifies. When you see 5 or 16 or 7 or 2, it basically says I can use this field or this relationship to get data from this business object onto this business object. That is what this number of links represent. And that is why I'm using this company to get details of the company onto worker. This is how we read it. And this is what this link means, right? The link shows that suppose we want some fields on business object worker from related business object company. These 5 fields, we can use it in our field section. And without using, there's no need to use calculated field. We can just go one level here. Exactly. That is what this link represents. Similarly, for example, if I go to compensation plan, there are 17 links. Now let's look at only the standard links for now. People would have created some calculated links as well. These are all calculated links. Basically what it says is that's fine. If I want to get details of the compensation plan onto worker, then I can use any of these links. And many of these you'll find are LRVs, ESs or R. This is what these links represent. It represents. These are the fields that you can reference to get data from related business object onto your primary business object. Can you please explain LRV once again what exactly LRV does? I'm coming to that. I thought I'll first also clear this bit. Now, this is my requirement. What I can instead do is I can create an LRV. This is how an LRV is created. I want to create lookup related value. I've not come to that yet. This is when we talk about LRV. As I mentioned, lookup related value. It allows me, as the name itself suggests, it allows me to look up or get value of a related business object onto another business object. Here I want to get the value of the company subtype directly onto worker. I'm creating a calculated field CF_LRV worker and I'm calling it company subtype. And I'll click on. Now here I'll select company because company links worker. If you see, the moment I select company, if you go back and if you remember, we can. Another restriction of an RV is we cannot select multi-instance field or an LRV. When I'm building an LRV, I can only use these three fields. Basically what I'm doing is the moment I select company, if you see, it directly says this gets grayed out. It is, let me repeat, remove that. The moment I search for company, if you see, it shows me only single instance fields. One restriction or limitation is when I'm building an LRV, it only shows me company benefits here, and somewhere down it will also be here. It shows federal withholding company. It doesn't show me these multi-instance fields. We cannot build an LRV using multi-instance field, but any which ways. This is how you need to see this. The moment I select company on the worker business object system, knows that this field links worker business object to the related business object, which is company. That's why this company here gets grayed out. Now, basically from this related business object, I want to get the subtype. Now what am I doing? What I've done is on the worker business object, I have fetched the details or the subtype from the company business object. Now this field, which basically includes company subtype detail, I have brought it directly on worker, which means now I can copy this, go back to my custom report, edit it. I'll actually come to each one of these in sequence. The reason I'm talking about LRV now is because you asked. But any which ways, we'll talk about all of this in detail, which means now I don't have to go to company and get this information. I can directly search for this field. It also gives me the exact same data, but then the only difference is now I'm getting company subtype. Let me rename it and let's run this report. We'll see there's no difference. Both these gives me the exact same data. The only difference is I'm getting the value of company subtype, a value which is available on complete directly onto worker instead of having to go to company and get that information. That's the only difference. If you see both of them give me exact same data, but the only difference is here I'm not going to company and getting this value from there because I have created an LRV to get it directly fetch that value onto the worker itself. Now this is a new attribute of the worker business object, and I can read this attribute as the worker's company subtype. Now how is this helpful? This is helpful. In the case of job profile, I'm not able to reference hire date. Now how do I do that? If there is an option available, then I can directly get hire date onto job profile, that I can find the difference. Else, if you see I cannot create a date difference calculated field on job profile. Within I can subtract hire date from date of birth, and the reason is these two values are not available directly on job profile. Had there been a requirement, what I could have done is I could have created a LLRV wherein I could have brought hire date as well as date of birth from worker onto job profile. And now I could have found the difference. Makes sense. LLRV is only used when you want to get value of some related business object onto another business object. Here I am directly getting this value onto worker, and that's why I'm able to reference this onto worker. Now the advantage is, it has advantages as I mentioned. I can actually go in here. For example, let's say I want to put in a filter. I only want those workers whose company subtype is, let's say, some A, B, C or whatever. Now if you see here, if I go to filter and search for subtype, I cannot directly get the subtype here. This subtype cannot be brought onto filter. When you create a filter, you can only create a filter using those fields which are available on the primary business object. Let me repeat that. When you create a filter can only reference fields from the primary business object. There is an option called subfilter available, but then instead of that, what you could have done is you want to put a filter once again. The requirement is I only want those workers whose company subtype is some A, B, C. Now the problem is I cannot directly put that field here because I cannot build a filter using subtype. It's not available on the worker business object. What I've done is instead I have created an LRV. Now the advantage of this LRV that I've created is I can use it for my filter. Those are the scenarios when we create LRV when there's actual need, because I need to build a filter and this field is not available, or I need to do some calculation again, for example, job profile, date of birth minus hire date, but I cannot do that because those fields are not available. That's when I'll do an LRV and get those fields that I can do those calculations. To summarize, like lookup related value, it does not help you fetch the data right. It only helps you to bring that related business object onto the business object right. That's the purpose of an LRV lookup related value or lookup the value of a related business object. I can read it that way. Now, if you see, I'm building a filter directly on this subtype. Before creating any custom report, we first analyze the business object and then the related links, and then decide on how to create it right. Right. What you usually do is, you'll see I need 50 fields on my report as per your requirement. Now, let's say 40 of these fields I can get from compensation plan. There is another way I can build this report using, let's say, job profile. Again, I'm just giving an example. I can also build the exact same report using job profile business object, but then that will allow me to get only 35 fields directly. That is how I'll analyze different business objects. And then I'll say this particular business object allows me to get 40 fields directly. I'll use this business object, and for the remaining two, I'll build calculations, whatever are required, right? You'll never come across, especially when you are working for projects. Reports are not as simple as you have 20 fields and all of those fields are available on A, B, C, and you just go ahead and build it. There would always be a requirement where you need to build LRVs, extract single instances, multi-instances, date differences, on and forth. We'll talk about all those fields as we go through this class. Alright, that is a LRV. As I mentioned, the plan is to not talk about LRV now. We'll talk about instance-related calculations later. For now, I'm just talking about simple calculations, right? And then we'll slowly build the momentum to get to those instance-related calculations. There's another calculation I want to create. For others, does this make sense, what we just discussed? Now let's say I want to create another calculator. First, we'll look at date-related calculated fields. There's another calculated field which is called build date. Now, for any purpose, you want to build a date. You can use this function called build date. Now, I cannot think of a logical example, but let's go ahead and see how this calculation works. I'm saying CF build date worker. I'll just call it calc. What are the components of a date? It is day, it is month, and it is year. These are the three calculate components of a date. Now here build date. As the name itself suggests, it allows you to build a date by selecting the value of these components. Let's say the year. I want year to be constant, a specific year. I can come in here and select, for example, 2099. Now 299 is not available. We get 299 as well. We'll talk about that. For now 2022, let's see if it is available. If you see, these numbers are not available, right? And these are simple plain numbers. And Workday. When you create calculations, these numbers are not automatically available to you. For that, I can create another calculated field. If you see, all I need is a constant number, right? I can create a calculated field called date constant. I'm creating another calculated field. I can create it two ways. Either I can create from here going to the task, create calculated field, or I can create another calculated field directly from here. I can come in here and I can create another calculated field here. In Workday, one calculated field can be referenced inside another calculated field, which in turn can be referenced by another calculated field, and on and forth. Right now, I need to create a calculated field which is a constant number, let's say 2099, right? I can directly come in here. I'm creating another calculated field. Now let me search for constant. There are three types of constants I can build: date constant, numeric constant, and text constant. In this case, I need a numeric constant. As the name suggests, I simply want a constant value. I'm creating a numeric constant. Now, in general, right, when you create these constant values, the recommended approach is you always create it on the global business object, because if you see, this is number which would be used or which needs to be used in many other places, right? Any field that is available on global will be available on any business object. If you see here, when I come and let me add another field on my board, if I come here, add another column on my report, and then when I go in here, you see there are different options available. Here it shows global fields. Now, these are all those fields which are available on the global business object. Any field which is created on the global business object can be referenced anywhere in any of the report, irrespective of the B of that report. When I come in here, you'll find there are three types of constants or many types of constants. For example, when I go to numeric, you'll find 1, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and many of these constants were created by someone. These are all. If you go in here, these are all numeric constants. Similarly, if you come to date, you'll find many date-related constants. 1st of Jan, 2nd of Jan. We'll talk about these values later. Someone has created 1st of Jan 2010, and this is a calculated field created on global type date constant. Similarly, if you come to text now, text can be A, B, C hyphen. These are all text constants. Now another approach when creating these constants. If you see, someone has created this constant called exam2 or whatever. Now it is not very intuitive. Whenever you're creating a constant, the recommended approach is the name of the constant should be the same as the value of the constant. I want to create a numeric constant called 2099. I'll name it as 2099. Else, what happens if you name it as CF-global, some numeric constant? It's not very intuitive, right? When someone is searching, they'll search for 2099. The name of the field should match the name of the constant. Again, this is a recommended approach or a best practice. Created on the global business object. The name should match the name value. This is just the name when I click on this. Is that value right? Had I given it any other name, it would have been difficult for people to search it. This is how I can create constants right. Numeric. Similarly, if I select text, I can add any value A, B, C at the rate, hyphen or whatever. Now I have created another calculated field of type numeric constant, which I am referring within this calculated field, which is built in right. I want my year to be a constant, a specific year, a specific value, which I've just taken a random example of 299. Now let's say month. I don't want a specific month. I want month to be calculated dynamically. And let's say I want month to be extracted from, let's say, date of birth of the employee. Now I'm searching for date of birth right. And let's say again, hypothetically, I want it to be extracted from the hire date of the employee. Searching for hire date. Again, as I mentioned, this is just a hypothetical example I'm taking. But then this will give you an idea of what build date does, right? And once again, let's say a given worker doesn't have hire date or date of birth, your calculation will error out. You don't want that to happen. You will say return blank date on error. Now let's go ahead and run this report. I'm adding. Not on company. Not on company. Alright, let's run this report. Let me know when it's time to stop. Now, if you see how it looks, because I selected the year to be a constant value, it always gives year as 2009. Right. Now, what did we select the month as? We selected the month to be from the date of birth. What is the date of birth of this employee? It is March 20, 1970. March is the month which is extracted here. Similarly, September is the month of his date of birth which gets extracted here. And what did we say the day is? From the hire date of the employee. The hire date is 01 which gets extracted here. Right? Here the hire date. The day is extracted from the hire date, which is what comes here. The month is being extracted from the worker's date of birth and the year is a constant value of 2099. Alright, that is our build date function. Again, very simple, nothing complex about it. For build date, this is function. What are all these scenarios? I'm just thinking, what are all these scenarios? We can utilize this build date function because this scenario was, I think it was not realistic. If you could give like a real life scenario, that would be great. Sure, let me think about it. I actually couldn't think of anything else, and that's why I mentioned. Usually, there's not usually a requirement to create a build date. I do not. I cannot remember if I have created a build date in at least last 1.5 year. Not in any of my requirements. But again, let me go through my own tenant and see if there is any scenario I can think of and give it to you. Can we use this as in a scenario like, for example, a person is getting terminated and we want to keep the access of this worker for the 90 days because 90 then become the constant. I'm just thinking. And for that we have a different calculation. We'll talk about that. There's a different calculation available and I'll talk about that. And that is much more easier than this. But let me think of a scenario. As I mentioned, it's not used frequently. I do not remember using it for at least a year and a half. At least, I never had a requirement in the last 1.5 year. But let me. It could be used if, like a certain department, has to apply for an exam on a certain date. And like everybody has the same date of the exam. I'm thinking only that scenario. Then you would simply create a date constant, right? Let's say you're all for all of you. The exam due date is 31st of March 2022. Now you don't have to build a date. You'll simply create a date constant Again, let me come in here. All I'll do is I'll come to create calculated field. Let me show you the date constant as well. Like, wouldn't that create like? Wouldn't it create the same data whether I use build date or date constant? It will create the same data. But then if you see date constant, that's what I mentioned. There could be many ways to get you the same result. But why do you want to use build date when date constant is much more performance in terms of performance and in terms of it's much more intuitive, right? All you need to do is, if you go to constant, all you'll have to do is select date constant global. Let me simply call it 3rd March 2022. And if you see, this is much more simpler, right? You'll fetch 20 to do whatever. Right? Instead of you going there and creating this calculation, both will give you the exact same result. Then this is what you would use. Alright. For the other requirement that you mentioned, we use something called increment and decrement date. I'll talk about that. There is a scenario and I'll show you how that works. We'll talk about all those relevant functions and we'll give you a certain logical sequence. Having talked, there's another date field called format date. There's another date field called lookup value. As of date, we'll also look at that. Let me go to lookup value as of date. Let me remove this filter first. I'll go in here. I want to get the name of the manager. I'll come in here and I'm getting the name of the manager. I'm selecting manager level 1. Alright. Now this is giving me the current manager of the employee. For example, for Maximilian Schneider, let's go to his profile. And I want to get the name of the manager. I want to get the name of the manager. Let me go to the profile. His current manager is Steve Morgan, right? That's what the report does. If I go to manager history from job, let's take some other worker. Someone has pushed all data. Have any one of you worked on data purge? No, but I know what data purging is. Maybe in one of my projects they wanted to use it in a show business process somehow. Again, it's very simple function. Someone has pushed all persons data, which is, this is a problem when you give a function. I want to get access to people. Let's see this worker. Now let's say I actually want you. I'll say I do not want, or I want the current manager for an employee, but along with that I also want to see the manager, or who was the manager for the worker, let's say when they were hired. Or for now, if I want to keep it simple, who was the manager of the worker as on 1st of Jan, let's say 2019, just an example, right? Now, how do I do that? For that, I can create a calculated field called lookup value as of date. This is the value of the manager of this employee as of today, right? But then I want to look up the value as of the hire date of the employee, right? What I can do is I am going to create a calculated field for that. Which is called lookup value as of date, right? Again, very self-explanatory. I want to look up certain value as of a given date. On worker CF lookup value as of date or worker manager on hire. Alright, what is that I want to look up? The manager of a given worker. I'm selecting manager. I'm looking at the manager of a given worker. Now here I have two options. I can look up the value as of a specific effective date. I want to know the manager of the worker when the worker was hired. I can search for hire date. Over here again I can create a build date again. Doesn't make sense. I can create a date constant. For example, my requirement was 1st of Jan 2019 or 9. Can you get me value of manager as of a given date? Again, I can create a date constant here and then use the date constant. But let's go for hire date. There are two values here. One is, what it says is it doesn't matter when the manager was entered. Right? For example, when I'm hiring an employee, I do not hire an employee on the same day as he's joining my company. I would have hired him in advance with a certain effective date. It says, I'm basically saying I want to get the value of the manager of a given worker who was effective as of this particular date. It doesn't matter when that data was entered. Or I could have also said it doesn't matter. When was the effective date? What I want is I want to get the value of the manager which was entered on this particular date. Right? I can get this value for this object which was either effective on this date or which was entered on this date. Maybe I want to get the manager which was entered on 1st of Jan 2009. That itself could be effective, let's say on 31st of December 2009. It doesn't matter when that effective date is. This entry date, is it related? Sorry, Temple, go ahead. This entry date is related to the business process. Zach, thank you. Can you please explain to me what is that business process thing here? Like how does it relate? Business process is the date that process all these transactions that we do in Workday. They're all done in terms of business processes. For example, how can I change the value of a manager? Either when I'm hiring an employee, the manager gets assigned, or later as well, let's say through a job change, right? I can initiate a job change today, which is effective, let's say, on 1st of May 2022. Then what is the entry date? It is today. What is the effective date? 1st of May 2022. The entry date here refers to the date that particular process was launched. Got it, got it. Thank you. In this scenario, which process it's going to see? It doesn't matter. Here we are not referring to anything. Irrespective of when it basically checks here, it is looking in terms of this object value. Once again, it doesn't matter if I select 1st of Jan 2009 here. It doesn't matter whether that change happened through a change up or any other process. Maybe that employee was directly hired and there's no other change up. It will simply say, see who is the manager as of that date, irrespective of through which process that manager was added. But when I'm adding an entry date, then it will check the closest available business process through which the data was entered. It could be hired, it could be a change up, it could be any other process. In this calculation, we can either add data as of effective date or entry date. We can add both. We can add both. But the data would be like, the outcome would be different, right? Because let's say if I entered him like I entered him and the manager was like XYZ, but then I cancelled that transaction and I added a new transaction and the manager was different. Which one would it pull? What happens is you can either select one value or both values. Now let's say I've only selected hire date, right? Our system will only check as of the hire date of the employee who is the manager. Or let's say I only select 2009. It doesn't matter. Let me make it simple. Let's say I select 1st of January 2009. Now what system would do is, as of this date, who is the manager? Maybe you initiated a change up, you cancelled it. You initiated a hire, you did 10 different changes. It doesn't matter. All system does is, as of this date, who is the manager of a given worker. And that's what it does, right? Now let's say you entered both these dates. Or maybe you just select 2009 year. Then it will check as of this data was any transaction for this worker. And if there was any transaction, who was the manager that was entered? This is clear. What happens when you have both these values? When you have both these values, system first checks the effective date. It will first check what is the value here. What is the value that you are getting as part of this date? However, the value is black. Then it will go to the entry rate criteria and see if it can get any value through this criteria. It will. If the entry date is 2009 and the hire date is 2011, then it will give me the return value of 2011, right? Right? And this comes in very handy. Many times you get requirement. Can you get me the value before change of and after change of, right? Can you get me a certain value of an employee before a given performance review? Or can you get me the value as of hire or as of certain value? That's when we use this lookup value as of date. Alright. What I want is, I don't want that person, all those first person. I'm saying person first is blank, right? That we don't have to go through that data. I want to make sure that I have the right data. I want to make sure that I have the right data. I want to make sure that I have the right data. Sorting it in descending order to see if there is any value. It's not getting me any value. Let me quickly create. And this is where we use the other calculated field, the one you mentioned. Let me quickly go in here. First, it is called increment or decrement date, but it's not getting me any data as of date, as of hire date. What I'm going to do is I'm basically going to add one date, one day to the hire date. I'm not sure if it is because there's no data or all data is pushed. Let me quickly first. Increment or decrement date can be used if you want to add a number to a date or subtract a number to a date. Here to hire date, I want to add one day. What I'll do is I'll take hire date and I'm adding one date to it. I'll explain this a bit more. Let me quickly first create this. And instead of hire date, what I'll do is I'll use hire date plus 1 onto my calculation. First, let's see if it gets me any data. A lot of data is being pushed. Now let's run this report once again. This is strange. Is it because the data has been pushed? I'm not sure, because even if it doesn't give me on hire date, let me select instead of 2009 year, a recent date. Let's say 2 ton. First a giant to end constant. To off. It's getting me data as of 2020. Let's see if there's any difference anywhere. With this worker, it shows, let me open this worker. The current manager is William Bales, but the manager as of 2020 was Logan McNeil. The current manager is William Bales. The manager as of 1st of Jan 2020 is Logan McNeil. It is giving me data managed from 2019. Let's see when this worker was hired. 924 to Let's have a look at Steve Martin. Let's have a look at Logan McNeil. I'm not sure if previous history is not being maintained, and that's why it's not giving any data. First of Jan 2000. Summary. 1st of Jan 2000. This is strange. It should give me data for higher date as well. What I'll do is I'll create this calculation in my own tenant and have a look, and then maybe I can present it to you. But then this is the logic. This is how it should work. The way it gives me data as of now. Let's see who is for Logan McNeil once again. Manager history Steve Morgan. If I go to Logan, then the current manager is Logan and the previous manager was Steve Morgan. That's fine. I'll have a look in my own tenant and you guys can also try in your tenant and then we can actually discuss this again next time. But then this is the logic, right? If you directly select hire date, it will give you the value as of that date. Any question? No, not from me. Any of these which are not working, this could be because of the tenant. What you guys can also do is you can check in your tenant as well and see what output it gives. Let's close for today. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel.